So today I want to talk about the stages of change, which are really also the stages of recovery or getting sober. I first learned about these. I saw a slide when I went to a SMART recovery meeting. SMART is an acronym, and essentially it's a group very similar to AA, but not religion-based at all, and they don't do the steps, but they're open to every addiction, whether it's food, sex, gambling, and alcohol. And I went to some meetings many years ago and absolutely loved it. And one thing I really loved is they talked about the highest level essentially being where alcohol no longer existed in your life, which I had never heard before and I had never even contemplated. So I'm going to circle back to that. But that was a very key part of my recovery. So as far as the stages, I'm going to just quickly go through them. It starts with a precontemplative stage where, essentially we can't see the problem. It's typically people that, are in that stage because of pressure from others, spouses, employees, parents, or courts. In my case, I was there because of a rock bottom I had about a year prior. But people often resist change in this stage. They place responsibility for their problems on other factors, and they often feel the situation's hopeless. Next stage, contemplation stage, and that's where people acknowledge they have a problem and they begin to think about solving it. They know the destination, even how to get there, but they're just not ready to go. But a key part to get out of this and to get to the next stage is when you begin to think more about the future. And that was really a key thing for me when I heard the concept of future self. We sacrifice so much for that instant gratification and really screw our future self. And that concept really helped me, and I'll talk more about that in the future. So they also say the end of this contemplation stage is marked with anticipation, anxiety, activity, and excitement. And, I think it's funny they said anticipation because most people don't anxiously anticipate quitting drinking. Although I'll tell you, if I would have, had I known all the joys that were going to come with, doing this in community, who would ever think as an adult you could make lifelong friends? But within the community, I make them not quite every day, but I make them often. It's amazing. So that leads into the third stage, the preparation stage. And that's when essentially making final adjustments before beginning to change your behavior. It's essentially, there's still a lot of ambivalence that has to be resolved and still need a lot of convincing often in this stage. And that might include looking at the calendar, since there's never a good time to quit drinking, looking at the calendar thinking, damn, when am I actually going to do this? Got this wedding coming up, I got this reunion, what have you. So the next and most important stage is the action stage. That is really where you put your plans into practice and requires the greatest commitment of time and energy. And that essentially means doing the work. And which to me is defined as doing hard things sober. So you're finally prepared to stop hitting the easy button and doing hard things sober. And there's a great quote there was a show called Single Drunk Female, and the woman's sponsor in that said to her, if you don't make sobriety your number one priority, you will drink again. And that is so, so true. And so again, it's in this action stage where, and then she went on to say, if you do make sobriety your number one priority, everything will fall into place. And, because when you have no tools or support, alcohol has a much better chance of winning. People will stay up till midnight or later drinking, but they won't make the commitment for, say, an hour a day to attend a meeting or do various other forms of the work. And I outline, the top 10 forms of the work in my episode number 6 on YouTube. So, you've got to make a commitment. You've got to make it a priority, the number one priority. And that's what self-care is all about. And that includes even ahead of your family. Obviously, you're going to take care of your family, but to the extent that you can ask for help to put, your sobriety, to make sobriety your number one priority, you've got to do it. And that was absolutely a key part for me over the past year, getting fully sober. And then finally, the last stage is the maintenance stage. They say change never ends with action. It ends with maintenance. And it's where you consolidate the gains, and there will be plenty to be had. And they say without a strong commitment to maintenance, there's a very good chance of relapse. And it's called prelapse. I talked about that in episode 19. And, I had that happen to me previously when I, had a good sober streak going, but I got out of community. Isolation is one of the key signs that can lead to prelapse. So you've got to continue to do the work, do hard things sober, stay in community, and that might mean, I now attend less meetings in my community, but I'm getting my community elsewhere, and I'm doing my hard things elsewhere as well. So, they say most successful self-changers go through the stages 3 or 4 times before they ultimately make it work, and most return to that contemplation stage. And, slips are unfortunate, but they do give us the opportunity to learn. I once quit for 3.5 years, and I did it alone before stupidly deciding to try to drink normally. And now it's been 7.5 years to get me back to a year of sobriety, going to infinity. But yeah, I went all the way back to that pre-contemplative stage, and for quite a while, it did feel hopeless. And then I was essentially there from when 2.5 years ago, my mother and sister showed up and did an intervention, so I was all the way back in that stage, and then, got through them all. And the real key for me was to get into community and truly do the work. When I quit for 3.5 years, I did hard things sober, just through living life, but I was in a different place this time around where it wasn't that easy, and I had to do the work in community. And, it's interesting. Smart Recovery, again, has a slide with these stages, and it's this maintenance level where they talked about that alcohol no longer exists in your life, and that is true for me. It is completely off the table. I can have a date over, drinking up a storm if she wants. Wouldn't even consider taking so much as a drop, because I know I will never take another drop again. I will never let that voice get reinvigorated. So they actually, in Smart, even call this level, they have a little arrow that says termination/graduation, which I was a little surprised to see, because people typically don't ever want to think you want to get that. You always have to stay vigilant. So you don't ever want to really get to that level, but I can appreciate it. I now think I've graduated in some ways from my sobriety community. I've certainly graduated from the newcomers meeting. They now are a meeting specifically for those that have a year or more of sobriety. So in a lot of ways, I have graduated. Again, I'll always stay vigilant, but I know I am never going to drink again. But it's taken me going through these stages several times before I got to this level. So, and that's because not only is alcoholism progressive, but so is recovery. So you've got to stay sober, stay patient, and eventually you'll get there. And you'll know that the ultimate way to be strong is stronger sober. And you'll join me in having a sober spring in my step for life. So that'll do it. As always, please like, share, subscribe. And as I just said, remember, stronger, sober. Thanks.